BDS has brought the spotlight on Israel in different parts, mainly in Europe, parts of the world, mainly in Europe, but also here. And one challenge to that is the state legislature. Many universities, from San Jose State University to several UCs, including Berkeley and Riverside, have the student councils have voted to uphold BDS, to support BDS. As a result, since they can't seem to win, and I'm putting this in quotation marks, at least the media, they went to the legislatures. It was introduced, anti-BDS legislation has been introduced in 22 states, including, it's not working? Okay, I'm gonna eat it soon. All right, so is this better? Yes. Okay, my hand will constantly go down, but help me out here. So it was introduced into 22 different states, almost half the country, California included. It was defeated in Maryland, and I think yesterday or the day before it was defeated in Massachusetts, which is great news. In New York State, as you know, the governor felt compelled to put an executive order to oppose BDS, criminalize BDS in New York State, because the legislature was never able to actually pass the bill over and again. In California, we're in the process right now. I shouldn't say it, the legislature is in the process of trying to pass such a bill. It started out written as 1551, 1552 by some right-wing nut in Riverside County, Southern California. Allen is his name, Mr. Allen, Assemblyman. And Richard Bloom from Santa Monica had co-sponsored it because he is a Republican nut. Not a single Democrat or Republican in a Democratic-controlled legislature in California, it never had traction, right? So what Richard Bloom did is he made that die and created his own bill, 2844. It was originally something else, but he changed all the language, took that out, brought in 1551, 1552 into language to criminalize BDS in California. And went through many different gyrations, a change here and there, through various committees. And in the end, it did pass the Assembly, and now it is in the California Senate. In fact, on Monday, it will be heard by the Appropriations Committee, and that is the last committee where we can try to stop it before it goes to a full vote by the California Senate. And I'll be talking about that in a bit because we need people to actually call members of the state assembly, Senate Appropriations Committee. Now, what this bill would do is criminalize, at one time, it would blacklist people. So they didn't call it blacklist, but essentially that's what it was. It would blacklist individuals and corporations, for-profit corporations. They got rid of people and just made it corporations. Now that it's come to the Senate, Richard Bloom has put in a lot of language that were stripped out in the Assembly Judiciary Committee. So the scratch my back, scratch your back process in the legislature works really well for them. Lorena Gonzalez, and I don't have proof for this, but I mean, in politics, it's all connecting the dots, right? So Lorena Gonzalez is an assemblywoman from San Diego, and she has a bill to currently farm workers get overtime pay after 10 hours of work. And her bill is to make it after 8 hours of work, they would get overtime pay. Well, she needed every possible Democratic vote for that. So when this bill, 2844, was before her Appropriations Committee, she's a chairwoman. And as chairwoman, she has a lot of power. She could just kill it, just like that, the bill. She decided not to kill it because she needed Democratic support, including Richard Bloom. But she didn't vote in favor, she abstained. And as a result, when her bill came up, they voted no, and it failed. Just to give you an idea of so she's not very happy. Now again, I don't have proof for this, but this is like my belief connecting the dots, and it's not just my belief, but quite a few of us in this coalition to oppose 2844. Now, why is this unconstitutional? It obviously is unconstitutional because it violates the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. Let me go with the First Amendment. In 1982, the United States Supreme Court decided that, in the case known as NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware, that boycotts are the most important type of political free speech. In other words, you're doing a good. You're creating, you're changing society. And how does this come about? In the 1950s, in a small town in Mississippi, and I don't remember the town's name, so sorry about that. African American members of the community were unhappy with the police department, with white control of the society in that community. So they decided to boycott white-owned businesses, including Claiborne Hardware. And they would actually take pictures of blacks who were breaking the boycott. And they had their own newspaper, and they would publish their names. So they were pretty strong in that sense. Anyhow, it ended up in court, one after the other, and so on and so forth. It kept going, made it into the Supreme Court in 1982, several decades later. And in that case, the United States Supreme Court said, it is the right of people to boycott. Political boycott is a protected free speech, period. And in that they said it's the most important type. It's political free speech is the most important type of free speech there is. Based on that alone, this is unconstitutional. What they did is, we're not creating a blacklist anymore. But let's just say, I'm going to use Jeff over here. Let's just say Jeff is a Zionist, and we know you're not. Okay, I'm just play with me here. Okay, humor me. And we're both contractors, right? And we bid, let's just say, with the state of California for the high-speed rail. I'm the low bidder. Usually the state would go with the low bidder, correct? But I have voiced my opposition to Israel's occupation policy, or I tweeted once 10 years ago that, yes, support BDS. The state of California, if this bill becomes law, would not be able to grant me that contract. And should they do so because I'm the low bidder, he over here can file a claim with the Attorney General's office of the state of California, which would then investigate me. And this is so it is a form of blacklisting of sorts. It's not a blacklist, but it is a form of blacklist of that. So again, that is one form. Now, another part, which is not being mentioned a whole lot, is the 14th Amendment. Now, in the 14th Amendment clause on, name escapes me now, the equality clause in the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution basically says you cannot treat one group of people different from another group of people solely based on their views. Well, that is essentially what the state would be doing. The state of California would be treating one person or one group of people or one company differently from another solely based on their views. And that is, again, a violation of that. Another part that's, I think, interesting is that there is no time limit involved. So, for example, I had mentioned 10 years ago I tweeted. I don't even know if Twitter was around then. I don't even know how to use that. But anyhow, let's pretend Twitter existed and I knew how to use that. 10 years ago, I tweeted BDS, go, awesome. Simple words, very simple, less than 140 characters. And yet, that was 10 years ago. Today, this law becomes law. It's retroactive. So it is retroactive to whenever. There is no time limit, there is no beginning. It doesn't begin July 1st, 2017. None of that stuff actually is there. And I keep forgetting things, so I want to mention this. So they are using the UNRRA Act. Now, UNRRA Act is a civil rights act. Basically, it's an anti-discrimination act that all Californian, or any businesses that deal in California must follow. Basically, you cannot discriminate against people based on race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, creed, or sexual orientation. You can't do that. So what Richard Bloom, Assemblyman Bloom, is doing is he's adding, or any country that the United States recognizes, or so any country or peoples, or any nations or peoples that are recognized by the United States of America, including but not limited to Israel. So let's put Israel to the side here for a second. Let's go ahead and go to India and its treatment of Kashmiri independence seekers in Kashmir. Let's just go there. Let's put Israel to the side for a second because it's too much of a... You can't do that. You can't create a boycott against India. and neither can you against Israel. And with this, it's not allowed. So again, they're trying to muzzle us, and silence us. Because BDS, at least in terms of, not necessarily in terms of financial issues, and I know we disagree over here, but at least in terms of bringing up the issues before us in front of people and the media, it is winning. It is having an impact on Israel. Now, in terms of it in the black eye. Now, obviously, it's a little different how the Democratic and Republican parties see that, but in terms of the average folks out there. So that's AB 2844. I have flyers. I know someone was passing out little quarter files, flyers. I have a full sheet flyers, 2 of them. One has this free speech zone on the side. On the back, it's really important. So 2 Bay Area senators are on the Appropriations Committee. Both of them are South Bay Peninsula. So one from the San Jose area is Jim Bell, Senator Jim Bell, and I had a good conversation with him, and he seems to be on our side. But you know, with a vote, I won't be happy until I see the vote, right? And the other one is Senator Jerry Hill, and his district is from South San Francisco all the way down to Sunnyvale. You don't have to live in their district, in my opinion, to give them a call. All right, so definitely give them a call. Don't type them to email. They're not going to read that. Okay, that's BS. Okay, call them. They're going to log how many people call and how many people live in their district. And so if you know people in that district, please definitely help. And at these places, if you happen to be off, you're not working that day or calling in sick, or you can work from home, if you can drive to Sunnyvale or to San Jose and be at that meeting and say, look, I'm opposed to 2844. They're not going to ask you, oh, which street you live on, what's your zip code? You're there in their district. You've made the effort. You say, look, I drove all the way from, and you could lie. You could say Redwood City, all the way to Sunnyvale, and say, look, I'm opposed to 2844. That is very important. Why are these 2 important here? Let me tell you. There are 7 members of the committee. It needs to get 5 votes for it to pass on, to move forward. Okay, 5 votes. This Monday is the first time they'll hear it. If it goes to suspense, that means the vote will be on August 11th. All right, this is our opportunity to get at least 3 of these committee members to say no, or at least abstain, and have this bill fail. It'll come up next year, but for now, we'll have killed it temporarily. So that's the importance of these 2 individuals. The others are from Southern California, most of them.
Back in 1987, Steve proposed that we form a labor committee of the Middle East because the Palestine Solidarity Movement had only portrayed Palestinians as victims and not as humans who do things that we do, such as work. And we talked about how the AFL-CIO leadership, as opposed to the rank and file, was a cornerstone of the Israel lobby. But what caused me to call Steve and say, okay, let's form the committee, was reading an article I think he gave me from the Hadassah, the Jewish women's organization, Courier, by a writer named Wolf Blitzer, a longtime Israeli agent, former staff member of AIPAC and so on. And the article began, in the lobby of the AFL-CIO building in Washington, D.C., there is a bust of Golda Meir. And that should not be surprising, because next to the organized Jewish community, the U.S. labor movement is the strongest supporter of Israel in the United States. And the article went on to talk about the millions of dollars in State of Israel bonds that American labor union bureaucracy has purchased with the dues of their members, their pension funds, and their members don't know anything about it. And so we started this unique experiment called the Labor Committee on the Middle East. And the first protest we had was in August of 1987, when at that time, the Israeli Labor Federation, Histadrut, which the Palestine Solidarity Committee, which I was a founding member of, would not criticize, they were having an annual dinner hosted by the San Francisco Labor Council. And Willie Brown was going to be the speaker. So we wrote a letter to Willie Brown saying, how could you speak for allies of South Africa because at that time we had an article from the Jerusalem Post in which Israeli labor people were objecting to the ties of the Histro-Jew to South African apartheid. So we included that, and we got no answer from Willie Brown, but we put a phone number out and told people to call his office. Then we got a letter from him finally saying he was going to speak and he would bring the issue up. Then we put another flyer out expressing Brown's opinion and asking people if they supported that and to call his office and let him know. And by wonderful coincidence, there was other protests at the Federal Building, and we passed out these flyers. Another union protest about another issue. And the workers picked these flyers up and said, what is Willie Brown doing speaking for South Africa's allies? And their office told me that they got millions of phone calls. I went on KPOO here in San Francisco and KPFA and told people to call the office. Willie Brown went through the back door, as did Walter Johnson, the Secretary of the Labor Council. The headline in the Oakland Tribune, Willie Brown target of anti-apartheid protest. Even John George, the black city councilman here, had to criticize Brown. Bay Guardian had a little article, Brown crosses anti-apartheid picket line, and the next week he did something that was more radical for him. He joined the Jesse Jackson campaign. Radical for him, not for me or you, anyway. So we started this committee, and then we found there were so many rank and file members in the Bay Area and across the country who supported Palestinian rights. And the AFL-CIO was totally miseducating people. And we had a number of unions pass resolutions. I went down to speak at an SEIU Western conference one year, in which they passed a resolution, the Western Conference, SEIU, supporting Palestinian workers. And David Aaroner, who was the head of local, was it 935 or 635? 535. 535, which was one of the big SEIU unions, he had been put on the national board of SEIU. And he went back to their board meeting with a bunch of our Middle East labor bulletins. And when he got back, he told me what happened. He had the board of national SEIU about to pass a resolution supporting Palestinian workers when the head of the SEIU and later the head of the AFL-CIO, John Sweeney, called a recess. And then he explained to people they could not support a resolution criticizing Israel. And so they tabled it. And David Aaroner promised I wouldn't tell anybody that, but he's passed and gone away so I could talk about it. One thing has not been mentioned. It isn't just worker solidarity. It isn't BDS. The fact of the matter is that 23 states have taken positions against BDS shows the fact that the Israel lobby is everywhere in the United States. There's certain sections of minority of the organized Jewish community is dedicated to Israel, and they do this kind of work. And so you have to challenge people. Barbara Lee, for example, in the Democratic Platform Committee, she was the one who vetoed mentioning occupied territory, Israel occupying Palestinian territory, and TPP. And so I called her office, and the guy said 150 people have called, and she actually opposes TPP and opposes the occupation, but for political reasons. She said explained it on her website, which she didn't. But this shows the power of the Israel lobby over liberal politicians. So that's another thing to be confronted. In terms of, everyone has to do it in where they live and where they work, because the taxes of all Americans are supporting Israel. So the Labor Committee existed for 7 years, and we had members, say, all over the country. We had other people, other unions around the country introducing resolutions. When they got to the AFL-CIO would not bring them up to the floor. It was simple as that. We actually, one of the other first issues, there was actually a protest against Zim long before 2010. In 1988, Dianne Feinstein, who is not a Zionist, she's a political opportunist, Dianne Feinstein went to Leningrad during the Cold War and came back to San Francisco and announced she had signed a sister city agreement with Leningrad. And the roof fell in on her. She was accused by the organized Jewish community of being soft on Russia, and she had never been to Israel. and everybody attacked her. All the liberals in San Francisco attacked her. So what did she do? She jumped on a plane, went to Haifa, renewed the sister city relationship with Haifa, and then signed an agreement for the Zim ships to come into San Francisco. Well, just before that, our liberal, wonderful Board of Supervisors in San Francisco had passed a resolution saying San Francisco would not do business with any organization, any company that did business with South African apartheid. And immediately the first test was Zim. So the local vice president of Zim, named Dov Teichler, made a statement, not under oath, to the Board of Supervisors that Zim did not do business in Israel. So I got on the telephone and I called, with a little tape recorder, I called Zim's office in Durban, in Cape Town, in New Orleans, in New York, and so on. And I recorded the conversations, and I made transcripts, and I gave them to all the members of the board. Harry Britt, at that time, had the courage to stand up and said, one of our constituents has done this and tape recorded these conversations, and Israel is really heavily involved with South Africa. I'm opposing this. Well, it was defeated 9-2. And because of that, I was going to actually support Harry Britt when he ran against Pelosi. So I run into Lenni Brenner here down in the Mission District, and I said, Harry, I'm actually going to work for Harry Britt. I mean, Lenni, I'm going to work for Harry Britt. He doesn't need the Israel lobby. He's got the gay community. He's got the Palestinian community. And Lenni turned to me and he said, he's a friggin' Democrat. Okay, the next day, I'm sitting at Aunt Mary's, a restaurant in the Mission District, having breakfast, and I open the Chronicle, and what do I read? Here's the article. Britt scours Washington for support, the 24th of April, 1987. Here's the quote. He said he will also meet with labor leaders and with a number of Jewish political action committees to assure them that he views Israel as a besieged nation that must have unqualified support in its ability to defend himself. I couldn't believe it. Lenni proved himself right. Lenni taught me a lot. Anyway, that was a lesson. The next week, there was an ad in the Jewish Bulletin with Harry Britt's arm around what they call the road into Anatoly Sharansky, the Russian so-called prisoner of Zion, in which Harry Britt committed himself to everything Israel wanted. I won't bother to read it all out. And then he went to the Jewish Democratic Club, the Raoul Wallenberg Club, and I was there. And he complained that some leftist, he said, some leftist sent this to every person in San Francisco, and now I know what anti-Semitism feels like. But what was worse, to show you the difference in the way people react to the apartheid movement in South Africa and Israel, is that after that, he became the head of New College. Nobody protested. Nobody protested. So, and we actually did have a protest at the Zim line, 1988, at a small dock way down from the port with about 65 people there. We tried, and some of the people who would not come at that time and spoke in 2010 didn't respond when we tried to get other people to come down there in 1988. But in any case, Zim, I don't think, if Jack did mention it, Zim no longer schedules ships to come to the West Coast of the United States. And that is a tremendous, tremendous victory. So one of the things I also did in the Middle East Labor Bulletin was talk about Israel's control over Congress. And in the sections of the later issues, in very small typist, I had a lot of information from the Jewish press about how the Israel lobby, how politicians, black politicians, Latino politicians, every politician kowtowed to the Israel lobby. And I mean, Ron Brown, one of the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, to show Israel's solidarity with Israel's invasion of Lebanon, bicycled across the border. Went to Israel, bicycled across the border. And you remember all Tom Hayden? Yep. Tom Hayden, in 1982, he and Jane Fonda went to Israel and southern Lebanon and stood with the Israeli soldiers as they besieged Beirut. And they went to the hospital to comfort wounded Israelis, would not meet with any members of the Israeli peace movement, came back to the United States, went on KPFK and KPFA defending Israel, and it wasn't until years later, when he was out of politics, that Hayden admitted that the AIPAC had forced him to do all these things. But he did that. He chose to join the system. He chose to join the system. And if he had supported Israel and South African apartheid, he never would have been welcomed back into the peace movement. But he will be pushing for Hillary like he pushed for Obama. I'm going to bring up something very interesting. The situation for the Palestinians today is worse than ever. Yes. The Oslo Agreement was a second Nakba, but even worse because the Palestine Authority Arafat agreed to allow Israel, legitimize Israel, to have a large part of the occupied West Bank. It's unprecedented in history, and also actually illegal for someone in his position to do that. But he got well recompensed for it. Today, the Palestinians have no international support. Despite efforts of BDS in the United States and other countries, Israel has a stronger position globally than it had in years. And in one of its big allies today, which is going to make the neocons and Hillary very uncomfortable, is the relationship between Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu has had 4 state visits in the last year, the last one being June 7th, in which they agreed, the last meeting June 7th was attended by the head of the Israeli Army Intelligence Directorate and the head of Mossad. Moreover, next summer, the joint Russian naval and air operations will take place with Russian aircraft and ships coming from the Syrian bases. An economic and energy factor must also be considered. The Russian companies can participate in the development and exploitation of the Israelis' Tamar and Leviathan gas fields off the coast there. There's also a strategic factor to be considered. The Russian presence will prevent the fields and pipelines from becoming the target of attacks by Iran, the Hezbollah, and Syria. This story has been censored, totally censored in the United States. This is from a publication called Israel Defense. And the reason is this. I'm not a fan of Putin. Putin's a fan of Trump, by the way. But that's another story, which complicates things. But they have so demonized Mr. Putin that if this is the neocons and Hillary who called him Hitler, that if the American public would find out that Putin and Netanyahu are in bed together, they would say, what kind of an ally is Israel when Netanyahu is in bed with our arch enemy, Putin? And one of the reasons it was kind of a payback, because in 2014, the U.S. pushed these sanctions against Russia for annexing Crimea, and Israel did not vote on it, abstained. How many of you knew that here? Anybody knew that here? Because the media is controlled by Friends of Israel, because most reporters do not want to write articles, or editors don't want to have articles in the paper that are going to get them in trouble with a group called Camera or the A-Deal and so on. I'll give you an example. There was something called the International Solidarity Movement, sent groups of people over to bear witness in the West Bank and Gaza. And the Examiner, the Chronicle, sent over a reporter and photographer, spent 2 hours at the Arab Cultural Center interviewing most of the ISM people who had gone over there and come back, most of whom were Jewish. 2 hours is a lot of time for a reporter and photographer to spend with people, and they were going to do a big story on it. At the same time, a group of important Jews in the Jewish establishment, backed by Walter Shorenstein, who owns a third of downtown San Francisco, visited the Chronicle, whose publisher and managing editor were both Jewish. Forget about that. They were accused of being pro-Palestinian, and they killed the article on the ISM. So that's just an example of what we're up against. So we need worker solidarity, we need education around BDS, and the college campuses particularly, where they're trying to stifle the discussion. Everybody can't participate in work. You're going to support workers who are protesting, but everybody has to do something that's in their capabilities, making phone calls. I wish people would sit in Barbara Lee's office That's the only way you're going to get something done. If he won't sit in Barbara Lee's office, who are you going to sit in? She wouldn't even speak in the floor of Congress when one of her constituents was shot in the eye by the Israelis, and it wasn't until a friend of ours, Henry Knorr, wrote an article in Berkeley Daily Planet calling her out on it. Then she spoke about it. They can't be allowed to get away with this stuff. Steve and I used to pursue Nancy Pelosi, but there was no one else doing that. Answer is in bed with them. I'll just tell you right now. Never at any kind of Pelosi or any kind of protest against Israel that involved the Democratic Party, they were invisible. So we have to have people who are not going to be held back by that, and everyone needs to do what they're going to do, can possibly do to change the situation.
Let me begin by saying that this is the first time that I've been back in here to the Uptown Body Shop in over a year. The last time I was here, there was an important event sponsored by the Friends of Sabeel of Northern California, and they were honoring those who have stood up courageously defending Palestinian rights. One of the awards went to Alice Walker, and the other went to ILWU Local 10.
Both very deserving.
So I was asked earlier today to mention that there are many different struggles going on around defending Palestinian rights. One in particular one right now is a young man by the name of Bilal Qaid, who's been on a hunger strike in Israel now for 41 days. And he's starting to develop serious symptoms, so his life, like Mumia Abu Jamal's in this country, is very much at risk. So I'm going to take a different approach than Fadi, not going into so much of the parliamentary, electoral kind of lobbying and so forth. I've always felt that workers' power has the ability to transform society in revolutionary ways. And having spent 25 years in the ILWU, I've actually seen it in very practical terms, how workers' power changes things. So in terms of Palestine, the ILWU has had a position since 1948. Actually, when Harry Bridges was president and the union was close to the Communist Party, they took a position of recognizing the state of Israel and right to self-determination for Palestine. That's not my position, but that is the position that the union is on record for. But over the more recent years, say the last 25 years, the ILWU has come out very strongly in defense of Palestinian rights and against Zionist oppression. We've taken positions at conventions, we've issued policy statements and press releases and things of that nature. So the way I want to examine the whole question of Palestine, what's the best way to defend Palestinians? Is it BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions? Or is it through worker solidarity? And when we get to union solidarity or worker solidarity, the difference between the rank and file, see, thank you, Janet. Usually I stand up and speak. I'm not used to sitting down and speaking. But, all right. It's more like a union meeting. Oh, no, she's going to complain because I'm not on camera. So there's BDS versus worker solidarity. But within the realm of worker solidarity, we need to examine the question of the conflict between the rank and file and the trade union bureaucracy. So in terms of Fadi's campaign, we, of course, defend people to right to criticize Israel and the Zionist atrocities that have been committed. Mustafa Barghouti, who I think heads up the committee in Palestine, says that BDS is the only way to defeat Zionism. And
Omar Barghouti.
Omar Barghouti, excuse me. And, you know, I have a difference with that because I think you have to examine what is the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that the State of Israel was created by imperialism, by the Anglo-American Empire. It first appeared in writing in the Balfour Declaration, where the English, after World War I, or actually during World War I, came out with a position for a homeland, a national homeland for the Jews. That was the Balfour Declaration. And it was because of the role of British imperialism that the State of Israel was first formed. And so I think you have to address what is buttressing the State of Israel in the first place. Yes, they're committing all kinds of atrocities, mainly against Palestinians, but what's the best way to stop that? Is it by boycotting? Consumer boycotts rarely are effective and rarely work. And ultimately, I think you're appealing to the imperialist governments of Britain and the United States to break relations with Israel. That's not going to happen. I think the most effective way is what's actually happened already. So let's examine what the people in BDS say and what people in the labor movement have said. Both sides say, look at South Africa. Look at the anti-apartheid struggle. It was BDS that brought down the apartheid regime. And that is simply not true. What brought down the apartheid regime is the black masses in South Africa striking. They did it, and yeah, there was some support outside of the country, no question about it, people calling for boycotts. But what brought down the government was masses of people in the street striking, demanding that the apartheid system come to an end. And so what happened was the capitalists, you know, the rich mine owners and the bankers got together with the ANC, the African National Congress, and they decided that the best way to preserve capitalism in South Africa was, yes, turn over the reins of government, the political power, to the ANC, which they did through meetings in London. So the ANC had to agree, on the other hand, not to take over the commanding heights of the economy. That is, not to nationalize the mines, the source of the wealth in South Africa. And that's pretty much how apartheid ended. But capitalism never ended, and that's precisely why a couple of years ago, the ANC government called out the police to massacre workers in Marikana, the miners who were striking. Because the reality is, under neoliberal capitalism, whether it's black or white, it's still oppressive to the people that it controls, that it governs. And so it was not BDS that brought down the apartheid regime, but it was the workers themselves struggling. NUMSA, the National Union of Mine Workers in South Africa, today, did I say mine workers? I'm sorry, metal workers, is very critical of the government, and particularly of the government training its guns on striking workers, trying to fight for better wages and a better standard of living, and massacring them. And NUMSA is now no longer supporting the ANC. So we'll see where the class struggle develops in South Africa. But I just wanted to bring to light that BDS did not bring down the apartheid regime. And the apartheid wall in Palestine will not be brought down by a boycott. I think Jeff made similar remarks today on the radio in the interview. He'll speak later. But basically, the boycotts are not going to be an effective way to defeat Zionism and defend Palestinian rights. So let me give you some examples of what happened recently around Palestine. So one of the reasons that the ILWU was given an award by Friends of Nabil was because of our actions in August and September of 2014, when there was a genocidal war by the Zionists against the people of Gaza. And so Block the Boat, which is a coalition that was initiated by the Arab Research and Organizing Committee, AROC, called for a demonstration on the 16th when the ship was expected to arrive. And we've been through this before in the Longshore Union. Ships that know there's going to be some kind of a protest will hold back at sea. They'll slow down the vessel. They maybe even change directions. So the ship was delayed coming into port, and there was a massive turnout because people are furious about what the Zionists were doing, the atrocities that were being committed in Palestine, in Gaza in particular. And so a few thousand people actually showed up. Then it was announced that the ship had turned away, it was a victory, everybody go home. But the few who knew how a struggle worked said, no, we have to keep the picketing going. Some of them are here today, by the way. We have to keep the picketing going. And so over a period of 5 days, what happened was there was a spontaneous resurgence of activists that came to the docks. It wasn't a few thousand. It was only a handful, maybe a couple dozen, maybe 3 dozen at best. But here's the point. It doesn't take thousands of people to stop a ship. It takes a picket line. And if you know how to work the picket line in conjunction with the Longshore Union, that's where the power is. So there were only a handful of people, but when the longshoremen came to work, they had already known because there was an announcement at the Union Hall. There was a picket line up over at Pier 57, I think it was, or berth 57. And so members went there knowing that if there was a picket line up, they weren't going to work. And so, you know, that happened, the first shift, the second shift, the company said, to hell with it. Time is money, and there's lots of money on these containers. So they announced that they're going to Russia. And this is a ploy that's been tried before by these companies when there's a picket line or some sort of a protest in the port. And so I got a call that this is a ruse. The company really isn't doing it. What they're going to do is go outside the Golden Gate, make a U-turn, we call that a Williamson turn, and come back into the port. And they even said it's going to be another berth. It's not going to be the same one. It'll be over at the Marine Terminal's berth 23. So we knew exactly where it was going. We weren't surprised. So there was a small picket line set up. But there was also an announcement in the hall again that there's a picket line up. The company pulled another ruse, which is instead of ordering from the hall, they tried to get the longshore workers that were on the ship right next to this one to come over and work the ship. But the longshoremen knew what was up, so they worked slow down, kind of. So hardly anything got moved. Finally, the company decided that they were getting out of port. This was 5 days now, and that cost them, you know, millions of dollars. And so they ended up picking up and leaving. Now, that was a tremendous victory for the Palestinian people. But here's the thing, is the Zionists immediately took to the press and lied as usual and said, oh, we got all of our cargo off the ship. It was a slight delay, but we got it all off. The fact of the matter is, we know from the longshoremen that worked the ship that barely 1% of the cargo got off the ship. We have the plans of the cargo stowage to prove it. So it was a lie by the Zionists, but what was most appalling is that the ILWU International put out a statement saying the exact same thing that the Zionists said, which is the cargo was moved and everything was hunky-dory and the ship sailed. This is a lie. It's complicit with the Zionists, and it's something that has to be made public, and we did at the time. That's the kind of thing that really undermines worker solidarity. So as I said at the beginning of my remarks, within the labor movement, there's a contradiction itself between the union bureaucracy and the rank and file. Another lie that came out that was in the press is that the longshoremen, this is put out by the Union International, the bureaucracy, they said, longshoremen will not cross the picket line because they're afraid. They're afraid for their health and safety, that these people are going to break their legs or something. It is funny, but it gets me angry also because everybody knows that's not true. The longshoremen were in solidarity with the people who were picketing.
Oh, God, yes.
Police? Yeah. Well, you can speak later on because I actually wasn't here in the port for that action. But there were several people that were here. In fact, some of them were actually on the Freedom Flotilla, which I'm going to get to a little later. So I'll enjoy, people can not only ask questions, but make statements when I'm finished. So, so that was the August action. And then we had an action in September. The following that, there was the Zim, what was the name of that one? Oh, Shanghai. Yeah, now this is the one that I like, this Zim Shanghai. Because we didn't have thousands of people in the port. That would have been nice, but it wasn't necessary. The important thing is to have a rapport with the Longshore Union. They know what's going to happen. It's not going to be a surprise, and it would be effective. And so we distributed the leaflet in the morning when the ship was coming in. There's going to be another picket line up in solidarity with the Palestinian people against the repression of the Zionists. And one person out of the hall. The way that it works, the hiring hall, is the ship owners will call up the hiring hall and order how many workers they need, 40 workers or so. All those jobs went up on the board. One person dared to take the job. One person. And so the employers got very upset about that, and they figured out a scheme. They figured, well, okay, so the longshoremen are upset about the police because one of our arguments against not crossing the picket line is that it's not that we're afraid of picketers, it's that we're afraid of the police. Yeah. It's the police are the ones who attack not only blacks and Mexican-American people in their neighborhoods or driving a car, they attacked workers, and that history goes back to 1934, to the maritime strike, when the cops killed two of the picketers, two strikers in 1934. And that provoked the general strike in San Francisco. That's how we dealt with police brutality. And there's been a history of that since 1934, going up to the recent war in Iraq, when the U.S. invaded Iraq. We had a picket in the port of Oakland, and Jerry Brown's police came out armed like Darth Vader, in their riot gear, and without warning, they attacked all the picketers and longshoremen who'd been called in to go to work that day. I was a business agent on duty at the time, and the police just opened up with a volley of wooden dowels and rubber bullets, concussion grenades, tear gas, and worst of all, they were like Cossacks on their motorcycles, attacking people and running over people with their motorcycles. And so, everyone knows that we're not afraid of our friends on the picket line when we're out for a common action. But what we're concerned about is the police, who whenever they have a chance, and we know very well the police role in society is they are the centurions, the guard dogs for capital, for the bosses. And they played their role like that in the 1934 strike, and they do it today against African American and Mexican Americans. Which is, by the way, a reason why our union is sensitive. Our union is majority African American. But we're sensitive to not only what happens in South Africa, but in this country as well. So we shut the port down when the police killed Oscar Grant, the BART police. We shut the ports down here in the Bay Area to protest that and try to get a modicum of justice for the Oscar Grant family. And then we did it again last May Day and the May Day before against the continuing police terror. That's what we said. Our banner said, "Stop police terror." So we're proud of this kind of tradition. And when our union officials, the ones on up on top there, say that longshoremen were afraid to cross a pro-Palestinian picket line, I think anybody with any common sense knows anything about our history knows it's just not true. So, and I have to say, people might ask, why do union officials do that? That's because they don't want to see the workers mobilized, fighting not only in solidarity with other workers, but also for ourselves. Because at the same time these picket lines were going up, our contract had expired, and we were in the middle of very tense negotiations. And that's the time you should put pressure on the employer by stopping ships. But the union bureaucracy was afraid to do that, and they didn't want to see any of these protests happening. And that's why they issued the press releases the way they did. So actually the first action we took against Zim and protest against the slaughter of Palestinians was in 2010. June 2010, there was, again, a vicious attack by the Zionists against Palestinians in Gaza. And there was a call for a mass protest in the port. And the way we did it was we went to the Labor Council, the San Francisco Labor Council, with Palestinians, and the Palestinians explained to the Labor Council and to the Executive Board of Local 10 the atrocities that are being committed in the Middle East. And so the union voted to take action. Now, 2010 was 6 months after a similar action by South African dockers in Durban who hit the Johanna Rus, which was an Israeli chartered ship. And so we took inspiration from our South African brothers and sisters, and we struck against the Zim Shenzhen at that time. What was interesting about that is that this was the first time in the United States that any trade union actually took action, put their bodies on the line, gave up a day's pay. Because, you know, I'm not saying don't do BDS. Sure, you can do BDS if you want, but if you want to get real traction and get things done, you've got to stop the trade. You have to stop the trade. It has to be a workers' boycott, if you will, instead of a consumer boycott. And that's the real power. So what happened? Okay. June 2010 was the first time a trade union in this country ever took action against Israeli apartheid. And that was not only done here, but there was a cry internationally in Sweden, Turkey, and India. Turkey because the protest was against what the Zionists did to the Freedom Flotilla that was going to Gaza. And Janet can speak a little bit on that, if you will. But I think 11 people, 9 or 10 people, okay. Okay, 11 people died from the Israeli Defense Force attack on the Mavi Marmara. So, anyway, I'll just sum up by saying I think that the solution to Israeli oppression has to be one, secular state, but it has to be socialist. There will have to be a revolution in the Middle East with Arab and Jewish workers together, fighting against Zionism and also Arab nationalism, because the King Abdullah of Jordan killed thousands of Palestinians in Black September in 1970. So it would take a revolution in the Middle East, and the first place it could start is in this country, because if we have massive workers' mobilizations in this country, it would put a real dent in the imperialism that is buttressing Zionist oppression in the Middle East.
Now, I'm sure that some of you, and maybe even all of you, have heard about the tremendous fight that broke out in Britain in April over Red Ken Livingston announcing that the Nazis supported Zionism in the 1930s, okay? And it was part of what he was denounced by the Zionists and by the right wing of the Labor Party for this. And he got up and announced, look, it's all true, and I'm basing myself on Lenni Brenner's book, Zionism in the Age of the Dictators, okay? So what I'm going to do now is start by telling you about the big fight in Britain, how it happened, etc., and then going into the business with the Zionists and the Nazis. Now, to begin with, I was not really interested in Zionism one way or the other until the early 70s, when, as a history freak, I came across a new Encyclopedia Judaica in the library. And, you know, us history freaks, we read we look at encyclopedias. So by chance, I turned open to an article in the Encyclopedia Judaica called Ha'avara. Ha'avara in Hebrew simply means the transfer, okay? And what this article was all about was a Nazi-Zionist trade agreement in the 1930s. I'm looking at it, and I'm saying, wait a minute, I mean, what's this all about? I've never heard of this, you know. So I started doing research on the subject, and finally decided to publish a book. And I tried to get an American publisher, and I kept getting two answers from the publishers. It's not scholarly enough, it's too scholarly. It's not scholarly enough, it's too scholarly. So I realized I'm getting nowhere fast. All right. By chance, I'm sitting in a library, and I'm reading two books on Zionism, one pro and one anti, both published by the same British publisher, Croom Helm. So I figured, look, what do I lose? I'll send them a note, you know, I want to write a book, are you interested? And they said, come over, we'll talk about it. Okay, and I came over, and they explained they had heard something about the Nazis and the Zionists before, so, you know, it wasn't a shock to them, all right? And I explained, you know, and I showed them some documents and so on and so forth. And the publisher said, look, Lenni, we'll publish the book, but you are about to write the most controversial book imaginable. And it means that your enemies are going to go through it with a magnifying glass and take the smallest error and blow it up. So you have to give us a photostatic copy of everything, every quote you're going to put in the book, or the book don't get published. All right? So, okay. You know, I'm emphasizing this because it wasn't just that I was honest, but my publisher was honest and you know, had the whip ready to hit me if I didn't do the right thing. Okay. The book got published in 1983 by Croom Helm in London, and some left-wing anti-Zionists were going to organize a lecture tour in Britain, about the book. I said, fine and dandy. It takes a little time to organize a tour like that. So while they were doing that, I went off to Israel, which I had never visited before. But since I knew I was going to Britain to lecture on my book, I had with me some complete texts of some of the documents that I was going to read to audiences in the thing. All right, now, the very first thing that happens, and this is pure luck, I'm in Israel, and Menachem Begin retires and resigns as Prime Minister of Israel, and a new Prime Minister is set up, and his name was Yitzhak Shamir. All right? Okay, that's his name. All right. He was one of the villains in my book. Okay? Not only that, but by pure luck, I had with me, bear with me while I find it here. There we go. I had with me in Jerusalem the complete text in German and in English, there you go, thank you, of Yitzhak Shamir's group, which was known by its British name, the Stern Gang, okay? Everybody, when they talk, they don't even remember the name, its own name. They refer to it always as the Stern Gang. The Stern Gang offered in 1940 to go to war on Adolf Hitler's side. And now, I had with me the complete text of their offer in German and in English, all right? So I went to an English language Arab paper, and they published it in English. And let me read a little bit from it so, understand this document is in this other book of mine. Both of them are on sale over there for $22, by the way. This one is called 51 Documents, Zionist Collaboration with the Nazis. And let me just read from it. I didn't make this up, understand. The NMO, which stands for National Military Organization, that was the Stern Gang's name for itself at that time. Okay. Which is well acquainted with the goodwill of the German Reich government and its authorities towards Zionist activity inside Germany and towards Zionist emigration plans, is of the opinion that common interests could exist between the establishment of a new order in Europe and the true national aspirations of the Jewish people as they are embodied by the NMO. The cooperation between the new Germany and a renewed focused national Hebraism would be possible, and the establishment of a historic Jewish state on a national and totalitarian basis, bound by a treaty with the German Reich, would be in the interest of a maintained and strengthened future German position of power. Proceeding from these considerations, the NMO in Palestine, under the condition that the above national aspirations of the Israeli freedom movement are recognized on the side of the German Reich, offers to actively take part in the war on Germany's side. Okay? Now that's the offer. That was the offer made in 1940 by the organization of the new Prime Minister of Israel in 1983.
Yitzhak Shamir.
Yitzhak Shamir. So, okay, as I say, I had this English language publication, published the complete text in English, and nothing happened. Nothing. I went, as I say, I was scheduled to go to Britain, so I went to Britain, and again, by pure good luck, the day I arrived in London, you know, I'm going to some friend's house to stay, you know, get to start on this lecture tour, and I do what any New Yorker does when you get on the subway train. I bought a copy of a newspaper to read. I bought a copy of the London Times, okay? And lo and behold, okay, bear in mind when I, again, bear it up. Okay. All right. The London Times has an article, okay? And what does it say? Mr. Yitzhak Shamir, the Israeli Prime Minister, has given an interview covering the most controversial aspects of his past as leader of the Jewish terrorist organization known as the Stern Gang. Shamir denied that he had any part in the efforts of Mr. Abraham Stern, the original commander of Lehi, Fighters for the Freedom of Israel, to establish contact with the Nazis and the Italian fascists. And then they quote Shamir. There was a plan to turn to Italy for help and to make contact with Germany. I opposed this, but I did join Lehi after the idea of contacts with the Axis countries was dropped. Now, understand, I'm reading this on the subway, and in my bag is the complete text of the Stern Gang offer to go to war on Hitler's side. So I rushed straight to the London Times and asked to speak to an editor, okay? And, you know, the guy came down, you know, I showed him the document in German and English, complete text, and he looked at me and he said, well, you sure didn't make this up in German, okay? Sit down and write us a letter, we'll publish it, you know, to explain what was going on. So, sure enough, I wrote a letter, and it appeared in the London Times. This is me. Your October 21 issue contains a denial by Yitzhak Shamir of any part in the efforts of the Stern Gang to ally themselves to Adolf Hitler in 1940-41. As an American away from my files, I can't be exactly certain when in 1940 Shamir joined the group, but in any case, isn't he confessing that he knowingly joined an organization of traitors which had offered to ally itself to the archenemy of the Jews? Nor can there be any doubt that he joined up with Stern before December 1941, when the Sternists tried to send an agent to Turkey to contact the German ambassador there with the same proposal. All right? In other words, now, you know, as I said, when I was sitting there in 1983 writing the letter, I couldn't prove when Shamir joined the organization. I knew it was before 1940, but, you know, I couldn't prove it. The plain fact of the matter is, of course, that he was a member from the beginning of the organization, all right? And, you know, today everybody acknowledges it. And that they sent the same proposal to the Nazis twice. So, you know, he certainly was part of it. All right, as a result of that, my book got enormous publicity in Britain. And the next thing you know, I get a phone call. A man named Ken Livingston wants to see me, okay? I didn't know who he was, and it had to be explained to me. He was the leader of the Greater London Council. Now, at that time, in 1983, London had a Lord Mayor, you see, who ran a little piece of London, maybe the size of your broom closet, okay? But real London, Greater London, was run by the Greater London Council, and Ken Livingstone was the head of the Greater London Council. So he had read the letter to the paper, so he called me in, and, we became political buddies on the question of Israel. And of course I went on a lecture. Then, maybe a couple of months later, I'm still in Britain on the lecture tour, I get a phone call from the London Times. Edward Mortimer, their Middle East expert, was in the Middle East when my letter appeared. Now he's back in London. He wants to meet you and review your book. So I went to Mortimer's house, and we had a friendly chat, etc. And a couple of months after that, Edward Mortimer wrote a rave review of my book in the London Times. All right? Now, to make it even more important to review, Mortimer later became the communications director of the United Nations. Now, as an author, I know things now about how the literary world works. If you get an important, favorable review from an important newspaper, other important newspapers review the book because, an important newspaper says read the book. Common sense. The next thing you know, I get a review in Moscow's Izvestia, the official organ of the Soviet Union. Now understand, I'm a Trotskyist. I could never have believed that the official organ of the Soviet Union would review my book. But, and like it, of course, All right, okay. And then, to top it all off, in 1985, remember the book was published in 83, in 1985, a fellow from here named Brad Cleveland, some of you may remember him, was in New York, got on a plane to come back to Berkeley, and recognized Stokely Carmichael sitting there at a seat. So he rushed over to sit down next to Stokely, as you can imagine. I mean, anybody who lived through the 60s knows, Stokely Carmichael. So, they're flying back to New York, they're flying to Berkeley, to the Bay Area, actually. And Stokely whips out a book and says, "This is a terrific book, you gotta read it." Okay? So, okay? All right. Okay. So Brad tells him, Lenni lives down the road from me in Berkeley. So the next thing you know, Stokely Carmichael comes to my house. All right? Okay? Now, I've been involved in the civil rights movement, but I never expected, understand, when you're talking about the black civil rights movement, the top leaders are Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, in that order, And now I know that Stokely was talking to Martin every other day, every day, that kind of thing. All right, so Stokely and I worked together in a coalition against Zionism and racism from 1985 until he died in 1998, 13 years. Now, all this was from that one book, all right? Now, let me get back to Ken Livingstone for a minute. Livingstone defended his opinions on Zionism and the Nazis based on my book. And he said, look, it's all in Lenni, now, in other words, in April. It's all in Lenni Brenner's book. Come on. The facts are there. The next thing you know, I'm in article after article after article in the British press. Unbelievable. The London Times wrote a long article on me, and then interviewed me for 5 hours.
Wow.
Okay, and wrote another article on me. You know, this is Ken Livingstone's guru. You know, listen to, you know, I mean, you know, just unbelievable. Okay, now, since then, what has happened? You heard the rumor that Britain has left the European Union, etc. That caused a shift in newspaper attention from Ken Livingstone to the European Union. And then the Labor Party, somebody issued a report on Tony Blair's invasion of Iraq, etc. So the result is that the Ken Livingstone, Lenni, Brenner thing has sort of gone off by a side. Now, they're still going to have to give him a hearing, and whether to suspend him from the Labor Party or not. But at this particular point, I can't tell you more than that because he's waiting on the hearing. The right wing of the Labor Party is worried now that if they give him a hearing, he'll win. So they're holding off, you know, the hearing. And meanwhile, this big fight is going on. Jerry Corbyn, who was invited here a few years ago, etc. Jerry Corbyn is fighting the Tories over the atomic bomb, you know, some kind of atomic bomb submarine, and on like that. But now you get a picture of how important the Nazi-Zionist thing was and is in Britain, all right? Now, let me go into what it is. All right, and Steve, bring me to a halt. So I've spoken for 35 minutes, so I can sum up, and then we'll have questions, etc. All right. What simply happened, now understand, Hitler was the winner of an election. He didn't win by 50%, but he was the big winner of an election in late 1932, all right? And at that time, the Weimar Republic had a president, and in January of 1933, he appointed Hitler to be the Reichsführer, you know, the prime minister of Germany. But as the prime minister in a coalition government with right-wing capitalist parties. Of the 10 members of the cabinet, only 3 were Nazis. All the rest were these right-wing, you know, capitalist hacks. Hitler, immediately, of course, you know, riots took place against the Jews, etc. And all over in New York, in Poland, etc., wherever Jews played an important role in the economy, there were anti-German demonstrations, okay? Now, understand, Germany, at that time, was completely dependent on imports and exports. Completely. I mean, that was its economy, all right? All of a sudden, the Jews are boycotting German goods. And other people, besides Jews, are supporting the Jews against the Nazis. Like now in Poland, for example, anti-Semitism was very popular among the Poles, but the Polish government was anti-German, anti-Hitler, because they knew that one of the things that Hitler wanted to do was abolish what they called the Polish corridor. Okay, now just to explain what that was, if you look at a map of post-World War I Germany, you see there's Germany, and a little bit over is a little corridor of Polish territory, and then there's East Prussia, okay?
You mean
That is-
pre-World War I?
What?
You mean pre-World?
No, I mean anti-World War I, okay? After World War I, that was established under the Versailles Treaty because they wanted to give Poland some kind of a touch to the Baltic, you know, for trade reasons, okay? And remember at that time, again, part of the same thing, Danzig, which had been part of Germany for 1,000 years or whatever, suddenly became the free city of Danzig. So, you know, I mean, this is the thing. Well, the Poles knew Hitler naturally wants to abolish the Polish corridor. So all of a sudden, the Polish government says, hey, we're for the Jews in Germany. I'd like, get the fuck out of here, Mr. Führer, you know, all that kind of stuff. And remember that in Germany, the working class was divided between the Social Democrats and the communists, the Stalinists. There were virtually no Nazi workers. I mean, you know, no one disputes that fact. And you had Social Democrats and communists all over the world who were opposed to Hitler. The AFL-CIO actually supported the idea of boycotting Nazi Germany. So the Nazis got very worried. Hey, wait, you know, I mean, if this keeps up, you know, the capitalists in that the seven capitalists in that government, you know, in that cabinet, told Hitler, look, man, I mean, you know, I mean, clean up your act. I mean, you know, they're going to boycott our goods. You know, that's us, you know. So all of a sudden, the riots slowed down in Germany. They had a boycott of Jewish stores, but for only one day. You know, everything slowed down. And there were giant demonstrations inside New York, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? You know, what happens next? What do? The Nazis are really worried about an anti-Nazi boycott. I mean, you know, and not only the Nazis, but the German capitalists. So, all of a sudden, the Zionists approach the Nazis, okay? And again, bear with me because I got to quote them, okay? This is the German Zionist Federation to the Nazis. May we therefore be permitted to present our views, which in our opinion make possible a solution in keeping with the principles of the new German state of national awakening. An answer to the Jewish question, truly satisfied to the national state, can be brought about only with the collaboration of the Jewish movement that aims at a social, cultural, and moral renewal of Jewry. Okay, you know, hey, Mr. Nice Guy, we're here, we're ready to deal with you. Okay? Our acknowledgement of Jewish nationality provides for clear and sincere relationship to the German people at its national and racial realities. Precisely because of this, we do not wish to falsify these fundamentals because we too are against mixed marriage. Huh? Okay? In other words, you know, you're the German Zionists, we're the Jewish Nazis. I mean, that's really what they're saying. Okay? And then they go on. The realization of Zionism can only be hurt by resentment of Jews abroad against the German establishment. Boycott propaganda, such as currently being carried on against Germany in many ways, is in essence un-Zionist because Zionists want not to do battle, but to convince and to build. All right? All right, now what happens? Okay. From here on in, I don't have to keep quoting from the book. I mean, a Palestine Zionist, I'll call him a Palestinian Zionist, because he's a Jew and a Zionist and so on, named Sam Cohen, contacts the Nazi government and says, look, let's do a trade agreement, okay? And he starts building it up with the Nazis, and the next thing you know, the Jewish Agency, which was the World Zionist Organization headquarters in Palestine, takes over the negotiations, and they send a guy named Chaim al-Sarraf to Germany. And they worked out a deal called, as they say, ha'avara, which means the transfer. Okay, now the way it worked was this. Anybody, Jewish, Christian, didn't matter. If you were a German and you wanted to send money out of Germany, they taxed the money. Let's call it an exit tax. It's not their name, but that's what it is. Okay? In other words, if you're going to send 5,000 Reichsmarks, we take 500 and put it in the German government tax, so you only get 4,500 going out the country, all right? They worked out a deal with the World Zionist Organization that is, instead of, let's say, a tax of 10% going out the door, it was only 5% going out the door. But more than that, instead, it didn't go out in the form of money. What happened is it went out in the form of German goods, let's say tractors, stuff like that, okay? The Germans would send, again, forgive me for using round numbers, so just you get the point. All right, the way Palestine was run at that time, Britain ran Palestine, and Britain established a quota of how many Jews could come in as new immigrants. But if you if you offered to come there with 5,000 pounds of money, you came in over the minimum, okay? The Germans some German businessman would give the Nazis the equivalent of 5,000 pounds of money. The Nazis would send tractors and whatever to Palestine. The Zionists would sell the tractors in Palestine, in Egypt, wherever. And when the German Jew arrived in Palestine, the Zionists would give him not 5,000, 4,000, but he was ahead of the game in terms of, he came out of Germany with more money than a German Jew going to New York, percentage-wise. Okay. Now, it only worked for a limited amount. In other words, the Nazis weren't complete idiots. If you wanted to send 50,000 pounds to New York, they would take the tax from you. They wouldn't let you send 50,000 pounds at a deduction to Palestine. In other words, this is a Nazi-Zionist deal done to the advantage of both the Zionists and the Nazis. You got to put it in that way. And by the way, I recommend that you buy these books over there, each of them for $22, okay? And read, I'm giving you a bare outline of the story. All right, now what then happens, so they have this trade agreement, and al-Sarraf, this leader of the Jewish Agency in Palestine, comes back from Germany, and he and his wife are walking along the Tel Aviv beach, and he's assassinated. okay? Well, his wife saw who killed him, all right? So, she runs to the police, etc., and the police use Arab trackers, and they find the guy. The guy, or they found a couple of guys, were members of a group called the Zionist Revisionists. Now, why are they important? These guys who assassinated the Zionist leader who made the trade agreement with the Nazis, because the Zionist Revisionists are the founders of Bibi Netanyahu's Likud party, all right? They were founded in 1923 by a man named Vladimir Jabotinsky, all right? And to show you the connection between Netanyahu and Jabotinsky, Netanyahu's father was Jabotinsky's secretary when Jabotinsky died in 1940. So, it's a in the family to the 35. Okay, all right. The British arrested a couple of revisionists who had threatened in their newspaper, to kill this guy. I mean, cut and dry matter. It went to trial, and the British court in Palestine said, look, under British Palestine law, there has to be, the fact that his wife recognized the assassin isn't enough. There has to be some kind of corroboration. And there was no corroboration, so we have to let the guy go, all right? 10 years later, in 1944, the Stern Gang, remember, these are the guys who are already, okay. The Stern Gang assassinated Lord Moyne, the British representative in Egypt, and a, what do you call the legal evidence experts? Guys who...
Forensic evidence.
Yeah, there you go, okay. One of these guys comes from Palestine to Cairo, examines the gun that killed Lord Moyne, and realizes it's the same gun that killed Al-Asarov in 1933, okay? But it was too late to do anything, it's 11 years later, on and on. I mean, you know what law is like, etc. All right, now, the problem, you would think that today's Likud party would say, hey, all right, the Labor Zionists, Al-Asarov, all these guys are pro-Nazi. I mean, we shot him. You would think they would say that, except for a little problem. In 1933, they said we didn't shoot him. It was an Arab shot him. See, so they couldn't defend themselves. They actually were saying the Labor Party was the Zionist Labor Party was collaborating with the Nazis. All right. Now, I'll close on another point just to show you how long this went on. In 1937, a Labor leader named Feivel Polkus comes from Palestine to Berlin and to negotiate with the Nazis, and the Nazis said, Adolf Eichmann, you, come over here and negotiate with this guy Polkus. So we now have the Nazi data, are what they talked about. Okay, I mean, there's no doubt about it. All right, Polka said, look, if you give us a better reduction on the tax going out, the money, we'll spy for you on Jewish terrorists trying to kill Nazis. We'll help Germany find oil in the Middle East. It's on and on like this, okay? And by the way, Adolf, why don't you come over to Palestine with us? Come and look for yourself. This is Adolf Eichmann, okay? We're talking about. So Eichmann goes to Palestine, all right? And he's there, and he goes and visits a kibbutz. And then the British realize he's there, and they realize this guy, he says he's a journalist. This is bullshit. I mean, he's some kind of government agent. So they kicked him out, and Eichmann and Feivel Polkus met in Cairo. And again, we have the file from the Nazis, what they talked about. Okay. Now, as I said, I was in Palestine, in Israel, in 1983. When I was there, I met a Zionist historian named Yoav Gelber. And Gelber says, he's a historian. He's a Zionist, I'm anti-Zionist, but he's a serious historian, So he told me, I mentioned Polkus to him, and he tells me, I've gone to the Haganah, which is the Israeli Labor Party's underground archive, and asked to see the Polkus file, and they won't let me see it. So I say to myself, I'm here, I have to go through the motions. I know they're not going to let me see it, but I have to go through the motions of asking for it. That's what us scholars are supposed to do. So I go to the archive, and I ask for the Feivel Polkus file, and they say, the librarian says, there is no Feivel Polkus file. They said, yeah, but Yoav Gelber says there is one and you won't let him see it. So the guy bursts out laughing and says, there is no Feivel Polkus file because it would be too embarrassing. All right? In other words, there is a Feivel Polkus file. Okay. And I thought about it. Now, I don't have X-ray eyes, so I don't know what's in the file, but I have my own mind. I can think. What was embarrassing in the file was not Feivel Polkus going to Germany, because everybody knew that from the Nazi files. What was embarrassing was who sent him to Berlin and who did he report back to when he came back from Berlin, okay? Now, my speculation is, it's only a speculation, but, it's the best I can do. David Ben-Gurion, later became the first prime minister of Israel, he sent him, Polkus, to Berlin. Because Polkus didn't just go there, some clerk in the office wanted to go off and talk to the Nazis about spying on them. And it had to be a big name, so that's who it was. So in other words, the Nazis and the Zionists and the Nazis had a trade agreement which continued up to the day the World War ended. Now, I'm going to close on this one last point, because this is too much. I mean, you all got to see this. In 1933, a Zionist, a German Zionist, invited Leopold von Mildenstein, a Nazi leader, to come as a guest of the Zionists in Palestine for 6 months. And he went there, he came back, and he wrote a series of articles on the Zionists in Palestine for Joseph Goebbels' magazine, The Angriff, which means the attack. okay? And they made a medal, the Nazis made a medal of it. Now, after the meeting is over, you all get a chance to hold it in your hands, yes, okay? And what it says is, ein Nazi-Volk nach Palästina, and that's a Star of David, the Zionist symbol, and on the other side is a swastika, und soll bleiben in Angst. And what that means is, and you'll look at it and you'll see it, okay? It means a Nazi traveled to Palestine or visited Palestine and wrote about it in Angriff, okay? So this is concrete proof, okay? Don't ask how I found it, got it, etc. It's another story. But this is it, and I, you know, this is the only chance you'll ever, it's on the internet, you know, photos of it, but this is the only chance you'll get to actually look at it.